We want to welcome everybody to this, the final in a series of online public forums as part of the Central Iowa Broadband Internet Study. I'm Curtis Dean, and my co-host is Todd Kilkoff, and we are two of the consultants that are working on this study, which is being coordinated by the Greater Des Moines Partnership on behalf of 11 counties here in Central Iowa. You know, COVID-19 really introduced many of us to working from home likely for the first time, while there are others who've been working from home for years. And we think that remote work is going to continue to grow as people become more accustomed to work being not necessarily a place you go, but something you do as an activity to add income to your family. Now, in this session, we're going to discuss how remote work opportunities have changed and how they are really helping Iowans connect to employment to supplement their incomes or for their sole income, and also how it's allowed entrepreneurs to grow and blossom throughout Central Iowa. So we're really fortunate to have some great guests with us here on our panel. I'd like to introduce to you Stacy Hupp Ballard. She's with the Iowa Economic Development Authority. Stacy, thanks for coming on. Marvin DeGier is with the Greater Des Moines Partnership. Marvin, thank you very much. And Ben McDougall is an author, entrepreneur, and someone who has worked a lot with the space, folks in the entrepreneurial space here in Iowa, and someone who uses broadband almost exclusively to get his work done. So we want to thank everybody for coming on. We also want to mention that we do encourage your participation here during our session. There are a couple of different ways to participate. Number one, you can raise your hand by clicking the raised hand button at the bottom. That will let me know that you want to talk, and I can turn you on to audio so you can do that. You can also submit a question through the Q&A function, or you can do so through the chat window. And I'll be monitoring those throughout. So feel free to ask a question or throw up a comment whenever you'd like, and we'll get to those as we continue through this session. We've got about an hour, and so we've got lots to talk about. So let's get going here. I want to start with you, Stacy, if you could. You're with the Iowa Economic Development Authority, and the IEDA has kind of a big umbrella mission to encourage economic development, economic growth throughout the state of Iowa. What is, from the IEDA's perspective, how important is remote work, remote income generation to you, to your mission?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here. I would say at IEDA, we've come at the remote work issue from probably about three different angles in my time here, which has been for about 1 year. The first is really the state's workforce attraction efforts. And those are efforts to, of course, build a highly skilled workforce in Iowa, which is critical to our economic growth and success. I would say also through the pandemic, in particular with the Governor's Economic Recovery Advisory Board work, which was all about how do we use the opportunity of the pandemic to help Iowa not just rebound, but grow from our experiences. And the third way that we're really looking at remote work is in the area of our offices here at IEDA and also Iowa Finance Authority, just in terms of, we are planning to bring people back on board as of July 1st, but we know that as an employer, we want to offer more flexibility. And it's just about how do we navigate that? How do we come up with a telework policy that works broadly? So those have been some really interesting conversations as well.
Great. Well, we all know that working from home in our modern age requires a reliable, fast broadband internet connection. I'm just going to kind of throw this out to the whole group to start that part of the discussion. What are any of you hearing about the challenges that persons working from home are having in either getting a connection or having a connection that's suitable for them to work remotely? And we can look at that from either the employee perspective, sitting at their desk trying to perform their job, or the employer's perspective, who sent home employees during COVID and probably had some that just couldn't fulfill their job duties while being remote because of broadband. What kind of stories have any of you heard? Because we've heard lots of them, haven't we, Todd?
Yeah, the main thing I guess that I've heard is more of the reliability. That when someone was down for five days because of the lack of ability to get customer service where they needed to, that was probably has been the most imperative. Obviously, simultaneous connections with people trying to work and go to school at the same time in the same household. That's also been a challenge. I think that's pretty universal statewide from what we've heard. But we're really trying to find out any stories that, any other perspectives about remote teams that were down because one key player. I think that's something maybe, Ben, that, you look at some of the remote startups are just nationwide now. And I think that people aren't fully understanding that the entrepreneurial community, your virtual teams are nationwide, not just located here. And all it takes is one key player down and your team is down. Is that kind of how you see it, or what's been your experience?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I think the biggest word that comes to mind is distractive, right? Like if you're trying to host a conversation, you've got some flow going on, and then all of a sudden I start doing this, right? it just starts to ruin some of the synergetic flow of a conversation. And so, on the crazy side, of course, if someone's dropping off and can't participate, and if that's for an extended amount of time, that could be pretty detrimental to what that group was trying to achieve. There are other ways around it. I mean, you see the text-based conversations in things like Slack or Discord or online tools where, maybe I can throw my video off and still have an impact. But I'm sure everyone has been on a call where they're the only ones on video. There's just a little tension that occurs in that situation. And so having kind of the tubes wide open and giving yourself the full flexibility is definitely the optimal situation where everyone can participate in kind of an inclusive, but also fully functioning mentality. I saw Marvin has his hand up too. I want to create some space for what he had in his mind.
Yeah,
too.
Marvin, please.
No, it's kind of agreeing with what Todd and Ben said as well. I mean, I think what we've seen is definitely the challenges, right? While we're doing the survey, we think what this past year has shown us is the spots, the gaps we have when it comes to broadband here in the area. Most people in their current living situations, it wasn't really set up to have one individual working in the front room and then their children in the other spaces learning at the same time. As being said, distractions. You could have somebody walking behind you while you're talking to your boss in an important meeting, trying to close a deal, and your kids jump into the call, right? So I mean, there's been all kinds of stories. It's just I mean, myself personally, you could tell in the morning when everybody had finally logged on to their first Zoom call, because the drag it's a certain times in the morning.
Yes.
You just knew what was happening, and you had to try to get your meeting in before or after, so you didn't get hit by that first Zoom drag of the day, right?
I think you just coined a great word that I hadn't thought of, but you're absolutely right. Zoom drag. Everybody write that down. Copyright Marvin DeGier. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I on reflecting on something you said, Ben, about Zoom calls, and is that person not on camera because their connection is so poor that they can't get video, or maybe they just haven't, done their hair up this morning, like all of us who are remote workers that kind of got in some bad habits over the past year. So very good point. I do want to point out to all our folks here that are watching, don't be shy about adding in and raising any questions, or if you have any your own experiences you want to share, please do so, because we certainly want to keep this engaging conversation going. Stacy.
Yes. Well, I was just going to add, and before the webinar started, we were talking about this a little bit about how I started this role during a pandemic. And, part of my job is to lead a communications staff of roughly 12. And building those relationships remotely has been, more of a challenge in this environment, clearly, because it took me months in some cases to even meet some members of the staff for the very first time. And so I think that technology, it has certainly been, and in our own experience, this was a little bit before my time, had just gotten Microsoft Teams set up for everybody organization wide when the pandemic hit. And so thank goodness that happened, right? Because we were all able to go home and participate in meetings, do our work. We were all equipped. So while it has been a wonderful tool during a crisis and during a pandemic, we also have recognized here at IEDA and IFA that just kind of what we've lost in terms of building those connections, me personally as a new employee, but also more broadly as an organization, just the question of what is lost in terms of those connections, in terms of culture building, IEDA and IFA just had joined into the same building for 3 months when the pandemic hit. And so you had two organizations coming together and trying to build a culture. And so again, from a new employee perspective, an organization perspective, that has slowed down quite a bit.
Broadband and technology are amazing tools to enable conversations, to enable communication, but it's not necessarily just a replacement for interpersonal dialogue, two people sitting across from a table. And so that's a really good point to make that. But in the past year, because most people have had to deal with it in one form or another, it has certainly, I think, allowed people to really understand better how they can use the tools that they have, the technology that they have, the laptop with the webcam, the broadband internet connection, if you're fortunate enough to have one. And so, at the same time, there will always be people who remotely work all the time, and maybe their role or their business or their side hustle, whatever you want to call it, that's the way it is done. You don't necessarily need to sit down face to face with somebody for certain types of business, and in fact, you just don't. So that's something to keep in mind.
Well,
Ben, go ahead, Todd.
Well, I think extrapolating on that is what I'd like to get some opinions about. Curtis and I have talked, in a lot of the communities that we work in is all remote. But we're fortunate enough to have fiber to our desktops, basically, just because of where we live. And we obviously interact with a lot of rural communities that don't have that. But I'm starting to see, in terms of if this is going to be a trend, like how it impacts opportunity, like quality video, quality audio. 3 years from now, your first impression might be always on video, because we got into this, COVID kind of accelerated and remote work is just happening. And instead of just assuming you're going to be face to face, I think most job interviews now, right? Your first round is going to be on video call, more likely than not, even if you're going to be a teacher in Carlisle, Iowa, because they have to put everybody on equal footing. But are you really on equal footing if you're, based on where you live? And is that just going to get worse, that you're not on equal footing? Because this just becomes normal. I don't know what people think about that. But that's one thing, that's one perspective that, I think policymakers maybe have to think about equal opportunity just based on the connection quality.
We have a raised hand among our attendees here, so I want to just introduce John. Hey, John, you are on with us now. If you want to go ahead and share your comment or question.
Yeah, Curtis, thank you for the opportunity. So I work at Pella Corporation in Pella, and so let me give you kind of my perspective on some things.
Perfect.
In our community and what we're doing. So, looking at broadband, there's a couple different ways to look at it. First of all, as the business, right? As the employer, and what do we need? So I work in the technology space, and one of the things we always have to deal with is who is available to provide redundancy and resiliency for us at the bandwidth and the capacities that we need. That's been a challenge for years. And in some cases, we've had to invest. We've had to spend money to basically build out the infrastructure to get the services we needed at our facilities throughout the state. not even just here at our corporate headquarters. So we've had to do that. And it's been somewhat of a challenge in our community as well, that the city is now in the process of building out fiber optic internet service to all homes in our community. I'm waiting for it to turn on in my home because I'm excited. Not that my service is poor, but it's going to be better than what I deal with today at a better price, better service at a better price. Where through the pandemic, as we sent people home, and we've never closed our offices, by the way, we've always been open, but very thinly populated in our offices. We had a lot of team members that if they were basically in a city, in a municipality somewhere, they were typically okay. Where it really gets challenges in rural areas, basically somebody on a gravel road, right? I mean, it's that kind of simple in terms of, we put it in that, where can they provide service? They typically have one option and one option only. It's usually their local telephone provider, and they can be challenged in terms of what that provider is willing to invest in and provide as a service. And then if you say, okay, well, what if you go to a MiFi hotspot cellular data connection, and what is available there? Typically you have capacity limits and caps and throttling that start to come into play. And even then you can get limited on who the providers are, because who has coverage where I live. Right. So from a team member perspective, an employee perspective, they also get constrained in terms of where they're at. And we're, certainly thinking it as those, some of the comments you guys have made in terms of the pandemic. It's accelerated a lot of businesses' digital experience, for lack of better words. And we are still thinking about how do we return to office? What does that look like? How is that different? What do we need to prepare team members for to operate in that capacity going forward? Because it's not going to be the same. And if we think it's going to be the same as it was 18, 24 months ago, frankly, I think we're fooling ourselves in that regard. It's now become an expectation, I think, for team members and employers. And if you want to be employer of choice, I think expectation to have some level of hybrid work environment is going to be a necessity, especially to draw the talent that you want, wherever they may be, to compete. So that's my perspective on this topic. I apologize for kind of talking here for a little bit and filling the air.
No apology.
With some dialogue here, but that's at least from a vantage point, what we're seeing at a high level.
And John, while we got you here, I know that those conversations that were taking place in Pella as the city was deciding whether or not to do a fiber project, that they had conversations with folks at Pella. And at all the major employers in town about not only the things you've talked about, but the challenges of attracting executive employees who may have a trailing spouse that also needs to work and may need to work remotely, and that inability to have a reliable broadband connection at their farm or their home was going to be a challenge.
Right. One person's perspective, Curtis, on that one is I would consider that to be a smaller part of our concern.
Okay.
What I think of is team members' ability to be successful working from any remote location, whether that's their home or somewhere else. As an anecdote, I recently was hiring for a very technical IT position, right? One that's hard to find, quite honestly, in Pella, Iowa. And even in Iowa in general, opened up the position to be working from anywhere. And I took a position I probably would have been happy with 20 candidates, and I got over 90.
Wow.
Really high quality candidates, and that's the only thing I flipped in the position, right? Well, that's very dependent on not only their ability wherever they're at, but outside of Iowa, but still our ability to service that team member, to have access to the resources they need inside of our network on a day-to-day basis to be successful. So, I think there's plenty to be said there to say, how can I be an employer of choice, not just in my community or in my state, but in my country? There's definitely, the more that you zoom out, I think the the more important this topic becomes.
Absolutely. Well, great perspective, John. Thank you so much for sharing. We do appreciate it. Any comments on what John had to share? There's certainly a lot of truth there. And I think one of the reasons we are having this session is we understand, and the partnership understands just how important remote work is to our economy. And we're seeing it not only here in Central Iowa, but all over the nation. Yeah, Stacy.
Yeah, sure. So one thing that I would say is, and I'm really glad that John brought up the hybrid sort of concept. As it relates to our workforce attraction efforts, we have a campaign at IEDA called This is Iowa, really designed to really help sell Iowa's quality of life and attract out-of-state residents and visitors alike. So, and we paused the campaign actually last year during the pandemic to focus on building support for small businesses, and also at a time, of course, when people generally were not picking up and moving, they were staying in their homes. But as we, prepare to relaunch This is Iowa, we entered the year kind of in research mode, and we had some interesting research findings around, workforce attraction as a whole, but remote work more specifically. And in the first quarter of this year, the finding that was interesting was really around how, remote work is absolutely here to stay, but just not for everyone, right? So as we're thinking about to what degree do we go out and recruit remote workers to Iowa, the finding and the recommendation was that it is, there's an element that's here to stay, but the share of people that you see working full-time remotely is shrinking and has been. And so as of first quarter of this year, I think it was around 33% nationwide, and that had dropped from about 52% at the height of the pandemic. And so that was something that was interesting and really caused us to consider, okay, is this the remote work recruitment piece? Is that, the move here, work elsewhere? There's definitely a place for that, but perhaps it's within the larger move to Iowa message that we're promoting. The second piece that I think is really interesting is a more recent finding, again, related to the same research that we're doing, and that's around hybrid work. In how, companies who really looked at during the pandemic, can we downsize our physical footprint, are actually now reversing course and looking at how do they adapt their workplaces for a more hybrid environment. Workers who want absolutes, meaning no remote work or all remote work, are actually in the minority. And what we're finding is that the majority is really wanting more of a hybrid situation where they might be in the office, part of the week, and then a couple of days out of the week, they might be working remotely. So that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, and how do you make a workspace that accommodates that? Right. We can't just assume that everybody that's been working remotely the past year has enjoyed it, right? Regardless of how good their internet is. I mean, that ability to go across the hall and talk to a coworker, and that collaborative, kind of collaboration that happens just naturally is missing in some cases. So we can't just assume everybody likes to work remotely like I've been doing for 6 years. So Marvin?
I think what Stacy and even John previously mentioned, that's something that companies have had to consider strongly, is upgrading their own internal systems to be able to provide this hybrid format moving forward. So, because before the pandemic, you had internet for all your employees at work, but not everybody was really doing the Zoom or video conferencing. Now you have to be prepared. Every staff member that you bring back into the office has to be prepared to still have potential video conferencing meetings moving forward, which then creates a bigger drain on your own system internally. So everyone has had to kind of rethink it. And as we move now, everybody's kind of having the options of kind of coming slowly, rolling their workforce back into the office. You have to step back and really see what are your systems currently at the capacity it needs, or you have to think about spending some dollars and improving your own infrastructure to be able to provide this hybrid format moving forward. So that's something that it was good to see that John and Pell and them had already thought about, but I think every company has to step back and take that into consideration moving forward.
Go ahead, Ben.
I've been thinking about if we don't learn from the last year and a half, it will have been a missed opportunity.
Yes.
And so whether that's providing all the options for employment and being able to invite people to work in the best way that optimizes the output, disconnecting input to output. If I can do a little thing and it creates a lot of things, there's value there. I also love the opportunity of importing knowledge from outside of our borders and being able to welcome different types of perspectives from all over Iowa, all over the Midwest, all over the country, and all over the globe, and vice versa, allowing entrepreneurs, allowing our business owners, allowing our citizens to share kind of the best of what we have to offer all over the world as well. And so while the virtual environment reduces some of the serendipitous interactions, right? You're not sitting at the coffee shop, someone walks by and all of a sudden there's a connection that occurs, or you meet someone random at that in-person event. It's been interesting how we haven't remained as tight of a tribe with the folks that you would normally see. But in exchange, you're interacting with a lot of different types of people. And so perhaps the balanced middle ground is continuing to tighten the tribe in those in-person gatherings while creating opportunity to make those environments, those communities a bit more porous for more interactivity, both in and out of those interactions. To me, I'm Mr. Brightside, so I'm always looking at things optimistically. But I've found this ability to teleport very powerful. The amount of efficiency that we've unlocked as humans by this normalization of virtual interactions can be compounded with what we, always will enjoy of the interactions, being able to cheers each other in person, paired with the efficiencies, the abilities to interact in a much wider way.
And it's really important that people realize that that's at every step of the socioeconomic ladder. And so you can have that same dramatic impact on the bottom 20% of opportunities of people who are homebound or disabled or, trying to age in place, things of that nature, because the studies have shown GDP is just plain higher where you have more broadband adoption. Tennessee increased theirs by almost 4%. Just through in those areas, there was a controlled study just showing how they did more training programs at community colleges about how to use video to make money. And so 1099s that were filed went up dramatically. And especially in rural areas that didn't have those opportunities before to do video training, like to be a trainer working out of your house as a side gig. So, we try to teach that side hustle economy at the same time because it's really not just about the primary, it's also about secondary employment.
I'm going to celebrate the side hustle.
I know.
Along with the financial benefits, it can caffeinate, energize your entire career portfolio. So giving folks the opportunity to do that, I think generally this is just leverage. And if we can provide that opportunity to leverage your skills, your connectivity to a wider audience, it's going to improve the economic development landscape across the board, giving folks the option. It's funny to me, and maybe I'm just naive, or I'm used to having internet and working everywhere on all fronts, but it just seems like this is an issue that should have been solved many years ago. And so my hope is that we can use this as a catalyst. All right, here's 100K, someone figure it out. First person to do it wins. Lean into entrepreneurship and innovation. And maybe what hasn't worked in the past, perhaps there's some new approaches that we can explore. And I think that's the hope of this group. So it's great to be here once again. And I hope we can just kind of check this off the list versus continuing to wonder how to do it. I am curious for the group. Are there states or environments that are often looked up to as examples of, wow, this is how they went from point A to point B, and we'd love to be in that space?
That's a really good question. I would offer a bit of, I would contend that Iowa is probably one of the leaders in that area. We've got a long tradition of do it yourself ism in Iowa. We have uh, I believe close to 100, or if not more, independent telecom companies, small and medium size, that have taken it upon themselves to increase and extend broadband to rural areas that otherwise might not get it. We've got 30 communities, cities in Iowa that have established municipal telecommunications systems. We have leadership at the state level that has been taken form with this most recent broadband grant program, where $100 million will be put into investing in broadband infrastructure to help those unserved areas. We haven't been perfect in that regard, but I think Iowa's been a real leader in that area. So I'll just say, let's look in the mirror, Ben. If you're Mr. Brightside, I think we've done some really good things in Iowa. There are still challenges there. Absolutely, there are challenges. But I think there's been a lot of progress in making those challenges be met. So
That's good to hear. And I guess I assume that there was this shining star, but at the same side, it's no surprise.
Yeah.
We are a very collaborative state. And as an entrepreneurial ecosystem builder, when you're connecting in all the corners of our state and hearing the magical things that are happening, it is like this positive sum mindset that where if you win, we win. That collaboration, kind of bottom up approach to economic development, is something that we're seeing a lot around Iowa. And so this, this lens of that type of mindset is kind of the next way forward. We live in the connected era. We can all do so much more with less. And if we can activate this specific element in order to provide those opportunities, we can continue to lead the way.
Yeah.
What is an entrepreneur but someone who identifies a problem that no one else has solved and figures out a way to solve it and then turns it into a business? I mean, that's really, I mean, that's what many of the companies that are solving broadband gaps across the country have done. They're solving a problem, and they're doing it in many cases for the profit motive, and that's great. But in other places, it's being done because of a motivation to serve the community. So again, all are very valid approaches to it.
And one of the things that this type of a study does, not just the survey, but all the components of the study, the conversations that happen, and things like that, is to try to help de-risk that market extension opportunity for providers. We go into this knowing that providers like to serve more customers. The question is, do you have enough resources to find the customers that are left that will pay more for, because they have a higher economic need for something and they are being underserved compared to what they would like to have. Mm-hmm. So part of what this end result is of this study is a proof of concept that we could have a self-reporting mechanism by which groups of people here in central Iowa can self-identify and start to collect market gaps that then providers can decide to go reach or not. If there's clusters of 20 homes, 40 homes that are sitting around the metro area, then on your way there, can you pick up a small town? That's kind of how this business works to get things adopted. And so that is the innovative approach that we propose for this. But right now we use this baseline data. We have to have it first to identify where the likely areas are for the next market extensions. But the definition of underserved will continue to change. 100 meg 10 years from now will probably be considered underserved. So as a region, building a tool that maintains our competitiveness is also, I think, part of the goal here.
Well, Todd teed me up to finally do a little screen share of the Central Iowa Broadband Internet Survey. Now, the survey is one of the data collection methods that we are utilizing as part of the study. Other data collection methods are this conversation and others like it, focus groups, meetings with providers, all designed to help carefully identify broadband gaps in this 11-county region so that plans can be implemented to enable solutions to come about that benefit everyone. So If anybody is on the call today as a participant and you have not taken the survey, we please encourage you to do so. Best way to get here is just go to centraliowabroadbandsurvey.com. And that takes you to this page, which is being hosted by the Greater Des Moines Partnership. Take the residential survey. So everybody wants to take the residential survey, or we want everybody to take the residential survey from your home internet connection. And we would prefer that you take that from your landline internet connection through a computer or laptop or other device connected to it, not from your cellular connection, because we're trying to identify the gaps in landline internet service in the area. If you're also a business operator, manager, decision maker, owner, we also want you to take the business survey, but again, at the business location. Or if you're like me, you take it from the same location you took the residential one because you work from home, which is what this whole topic is about today. So just wanted to put a plug in for the Central Iowa Broadband Survey and encourage anybody who hasn't taken it to do it. The survey closes Friday at 5. So we will then start deep diving into the data that we've collected. So I appreciate everybody taking advantage of that. Ben, I know you had a comment about environmental and sustainability. Maybe kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Oh, just curious about a program, a contest, making this competitive. I talked about the collaborative approach. I think there's a lot of opportunity to lean into that direction. But if you gamify this conversation and allow people who naturally have big ideas and the ability to evolve ideas into reality, maybe that's a little fuel to the fire. And maybe a different approach. So my question was around, has that been explored in the past? Are there programs that might have tried something like that?
That's a great perspective. You know, Todd and I have been fortunate enough to work with a county here in Iowa, not in the 11 county region, but elsewhere, that one of their primary goals was to be able to hang their hat on the fact that they wanted to be the first county in Iowa with 100% fiber to the home coverage. And so they have been working with the local providers to come up with a plan to do that. They're not there yet, but they are certainly trying to do that. Now, that reward is just pride and the fact that they will be able to then more effectively market their county elsewhere. But yeah, I love that idea, Ben, how that could be and how that could be incentivized to whether it be a local area or a regional area, or maybe all 11 counties of central Iowa, to say we are the first region in the country where broadband of a certain level and quality is available to 100% of the population. That would be a laudable goal, I would think. Again, if anyone has any questions, we ask you to just chime in. I do want to take a minute before we get too far along here. I had the opportunity to talk to Dave Tucker, and he is with Todd, help me here. I'm drawing a blank. Next Level
Ventures. Playing roles. He works for Next Level Ventures now, so he's in the entrepreneurship space. He was at Workiva, so he's in the large employer space, and then he was at TAI as the board chair.
Yeah, he's worn a lot of different hats over the years, so we kind of wanted to get his perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and share that interview, which we did just yesterday. Our next guest is Dave Tucker, and Dave is with Next Level Ventures based in Ames. And we're excited to have you as a panelist. Dave, I know you aren't able to join us for a live session, so thanks for taking a few minutes to record this conversation. Tell us a little bit about what Next Level Ventures is and does.
Okay, well, thanks for having me, Curtis. Next Level Ventures is a venture capital firm. It's actually based in Des Moines. I personally live in Ames, and now I'm actually in the Des Moines office today. Next Level has 3 different funds. Two of the funds were set up to invest specifically in Iowa-based companies. So venture firm invest in Iowa companies, hoping to grow the Iowa ecosystem of primarily technology companies, but can be any of a variety of companies. And now a third fund, which is a national fund, focused on fintech or financial technology companies that primarily service credit unions.
Okay.
But our job is to invest and grow technology companies.
Well, technology companies are probably using broadband, I would imagine. And of course, that's, one of that's the main topic of this study that we're doing, the Central Iowa Broadband Internet Study, and is also the topic of our discussion today, primarily remote work. Work can be defined a lot of different ways, Dave. And from your perspective, work also means that startup, a company that has a brilliant idea and wants to start up and, create a company and create economic opportunities for owners and employees and that sort of thing. And since you're working in the technology field, I would imagine that those startups, those new entities, those companies, those brilliant idea creators need excellent broadband.
I think that goes without saying. My previous company, Workiva, which was based in Ames, started out as a SaaS-based company or internet-based software company, and we rely heavily on internet, as most tech companies do now. And any company, I think, that is trying to grow, trying to recruit solid, stable internet is, it almost goes without saying. That's just part of the fundamental needs of the company, just like electricity, water, everything else that you need. And so I think having high speed, high quality internet is just a cornerstone to make that possible.
And not just at a company's location, right? Their main office, but also in the homes of individuals who are connected with the company and employees, right?
Yes, today, almost every company that we're working with or investing in has companies increasingly not spread across just Iowa, but spread across the country. I think one of the good things the pandemic has done, if you want to call it a good thing, is it's opened up the recruiting footprint for a lot of companies to say, we're not going to recruit just in Iowa, but we'll recruit nationally. But almost every company has people working from their homes to make that possible. Almost every company we work with has teams who are distributed in one way or another today.
Is it easier in today's world to, say, attract a company or get a company to get started in a location like Central Iowa if that broadband connectivity is fairly universal?
Yeah, and in fact, I think it's required.
Okay.
And I think having stable and high speed internet, it's not enough to just have a connection, but it needs to be reliable and high speed to really be effective in recruiting people or to effectively manage teams, in an environment like that.
Reliability is one of those things that is often overlooked. It's probably not overlooked by the consumer, but it's often overlooked by policymakers who understand that, yeah, we need to get high speed internet, but high speed is of little value when it's not on the connectivity. I would imagine in the technology field, speed is important, but that ability to be able to use that speed whenever you want is extremely vital.
And I didn't even, I think, appreciate how vital it is until last summer after the derecho hit Iowa. And I was without internet for a few days. And then even as it came back, I started to realize as I was spending essentially 100% of my time working from my home, it's just not acceptable to be on a meeting, especially an important meeting, and have your Zoom connection go in and out or crash. And so I even went so far as to have two internet services to my home, a primary and a backup, just for that remote case that it might happen.
Yeah.
I never thought I would do that, but it became critical.
That's been something that certain industries that has been commonplace for longer, such as banking, for example. Healthcare facilities generally want that redundancy, so if the primary is down, you have the backup. But that's really interesting because if you are a home-based business, or if you're an entrepreneur who's building a technology company in one location with workers in multiple areas, and they all have to be online in order to add value to whatever is being worked on, it's probably just as important for redundancy even at the home for some of those folks.
Yeah, again, it goes without saying, compare it to your electricity.
Yeah.
How good is it for you if your electricity kind of goes in and out during the day? Is that acceptable for you in your home?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something that we've been spoiled by on the electricity side. And I guess that a lot of people would like to see broadband become just as reliable as that electric grid, which, barring a derecho, tends to be, very reliable and always available. So when the light switch is flipped, the light's going to come on. You don't have to hope and pray that it does. So,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think if I was truly going to be a place where you attract high-tech workers, internet has to be just considered another utility, like electricity, water. It has to be as stable, as reliable as any other utility in your home.
What's the number one thing you'd like people to know from your perspective about the importance of remote work and how it's connected to broadband?
Well, I think today it's such a huge opportunity in my mind for Iowa in particular, for those looking for employment in other places, for being able to attract remote workers. We've got such a great opportunity. I moved back to Iowa in 1997, in part because there was just enough internet speed where I could move back to Iowa then, and we chose to move here because we wanted to raise our family here. And I think there are so many people out there like that to me, it's just a great opportunity to attract people back to Iowa and to make a lot of opportunities available for those outside the state, to work for Iowa companies.
Live here, work anywhere. I think that's a term that I've seen used in a bunch of cases. And certainly all of the quality of life elements that we bring to the table here in Iowa can be, accessed and allow someone to, create their employment opportunities, their economic value to their family from anywhere in the world by living here. So great.
Right.
Well, Dave, I really want to thank you for taking a few minutes with us today and your perspective. Again, Dave Tucker is with Next Level Ventures. And Dave, thank you very much and appreciate your input.
Thanks for having me. It was great talking with you.
You bet.
Curtis, you're on mute.
I am, aren't I? This is the fourth one of these sessions. Is the first time I've done that. So what I was saying so well was that we just want to open it up to everybody here on the panel and all our participants that are joining us here to type a question in or raise your hand if you'd like. We'd love to hear from you. So yeah, the adding value to our community through having better broadband, that's certainly what this study is all about. So
I want to say, Ben, sounds like Dave solved the issue when he said broadband equaling utility. That's your answer. That's what you wanted, right? The innovation, let's just make it straight across the board for everybody to have access, right?
It's easy like that, right?
Boom, it's done. Yeah, that word though does scare providers. So just so we establish that when we say the word utility, it doesn't necessarily mean a utility like the way the FCC might define it, or that it's highly regulated in this way or the other way. But what we mean by that is a delivery mechanism for a necessity of life. And utilities are such as electricity, water, natural gas, and now broadband. And I always like to talk about the parallels that we see between where our country is today and where it was 100 years ago. 100 years ago, there was this new technological innovation. It was called electricity. And electricity first was just used to light our homes. And then pretty soon some entrepreneurs figured out that, ooh, we could use this to create refrigeration so that we can have cold food and cold houses later. And pretty soon we were using electricity for everything, absolutely everything in our lives. But at the beginning of that innovation revolution with electricity, there were definitely haves and have-nots. Those gaps took many, many, many years to get filled. And it took strong efforts and concerted efforts with things like the Rural Electrification Association to bring electricity to farm places, for example. So it's certainly, we're kind of that where we're at today with broadband. We're about 20 years after it was first really invented. And now we're at that point where we got to get it to everybody. And that's what all these efforts are about. And I know Stacy mentioned broadband grants to the Empower Rural Iowa first became available in 2018. That's been a great program, Stacy, and it is going to continue and grow now with additional funding that is to be released through the most recent legislative session.
Yes, absolutely. So and so glad that Ben brought it up. So our broadband grants through, first of all, Empower Rural Iowa is an initiative to provide rural communities the tools that they need to, enact meaningful change, essentially. And those broadband grants became available. I think about the first year was about $1 million. Dollars or so. And then the following year, another 5 million. Of course, during the pandemic in 2020, $50 million became available. And that was basically a relief mechanism through the CARES Act. And then, of course, we follow that with the legislation that the governor signed recently, spending about $100 million. And, a lot of this stems from the conversations, that everybody's been having around broadband, and critical infrastructure came to mind when we were talking about what's the correct terminology for this. So it's critical infrastructure for the way that we live, work, and do business. And broadband was such a key theme during the economic recovery work that the governor convened last summer. Again, private industry-led working groups spanning across 7 different sectors. And broadband ended up being, I believe, the number 2, expanding broadband became, I believe, the number 2 top recommendation ultimately for that group when they issued their recommendations. And that, of course, is what spurred the legislation that the governor signed into law. But so it's about, a lot of the conversations were about the fact that Iowans really how much they depended on broadband and home internet connections, essentially, to work, for schooling, for healthcare, as telemedicine became something that people perhaps in the, previous to the pandemic were a little skittish about, but then it just became a reality. And, now it's become much more acceptable. But we also talk about broadband for business and how these investments are so critical to keeping advanced manufacturing and our agriculture industries competitive globally, especially as, particularly for manufacturing. We talk a lot about this technology revolution and how digital technologies are transforming the future of these industries and economy in Iowa.
Well, that just going to share the screen. This is the state OCIO's office map of where you see blue here considered unserved or underserved areas in Iowa. And that's where this funding, the state broadband grant program, has been aimed at. And if you relate it back to our topic that we've been talking about today, if you live in one of these blue areas, it is going to be very difficult for you to work remotely. It is going to be difficult for you and your business to thrive. And that's one of the reasons why these investments have been targeted in these areas, to make sure that everyone has service. And at that point, then we can all turn our attention to, well, how do we keep making it better? Because we know the demand will grow. And what we consider to be served today and what we will consider to be good service tomorrow are going to be two different things. So hopefully this study and all the efforts that are being done will help us do a better job of that.
I would just add, I don't know that it's come up in this conversation, Curtis, but nationally, Iowa ranks 45th in the country for broadband. This was a study by Broadband Now, and so that covers access, speed, and cost.
Right.
And I believe in terms of broadband speed, we're only behind South Dakota we're only ahead of South Dakota and Alaska, rather, in terms of broadband speed.
Yeah.
So thinking
Some
of
work
those
to do.
rankings, it's pretty dramatic.
Yeah. Well, you can tell something is a good idea when politicians of both parties agree on it. And this most recent state broadband program certainly has been something there's been strong consensus on, and that's always a very positive thing. Got a couple of just a minute or two left here. Any other closing thoughts from any of our panelists?
That map was interesting and not something that I've seen before. I'm definitely curious to explore those blue areas, and specifically in the entrepreneurial ecosystem building side of things, what's happening with entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, and students in those communities, and finding out, where they're convening, how they're doing things. I would love to connect more into those specific areas. I don't know, Todd or Curtis, if you could share the link to that map, but I think it would be nice to have in a bookmark so that we can explore some of the gaps that we're looking to fill. And I'll finish so the Startup Community Way is a fun book, evolving entrepreneurial ecosystems. And I know a lot of my perspective comes from that entrepreneurial perspective, but I remembered a passage in here talking about how it's like quality of place almost first, and then
Yes.
figuring out where you want to, build your career portfolio from there. And it says, entrepreneurs want to build lasting things. This desire extends beyond their companies and is an amplifying, motivating factor. As it turns out, they also want to do it in the places they love and where they and their families spend the most time. I mean, if this just gets checked off the list, we can continue to lead the way, knowing that Iowa is the place to be. And I'm excited, and I look forward to continuing to accelerate those who have this growth mindset, the idea of not scarcity, but abundance, the positive sum. Let's help each other. Let's give first. Let's grow together. That type of collaborative mental modeling is so powerful. And while it's hard to quantify, and the measurement of ecosystem building versus jobs created is a pretty fuzzy path, the work that we can do together in helping each other succeed is remarkable and does pay off in that long-term game. So thanks for the opportunity to enjoy some coffee this morning. And as I said in the chat, I'd be happy to continue conversations with anyone that's continuing to build passionately into the directions they care about.
Well, Ben, we appreciate your passion and thank you so much for bringing your perspective to our discussion today. I did post a link to the map, and that I posted it in the chat window. So any of our panelists or attendees, you can look at that. A caution on the map, it's going to change because with the new state broadband program, the funding is being tiered. And so that map will become multicolored. So some areas will be available for certain levels of funding, other areas for different levels of funding. So we don't know exactly when the OCIO will have that new map out. I imagine it'll be posted and made very, very prevalent on their OCIO website. So you can always go there and you'll get where they are. The Iowa OCIO office has done an amazing job.
Yeah, I agree
and
with that.
One of the best run in the state of Iowa. They've done a nice job with these programs. So final thoughts, anyone? All right, great. Thank you all for joining us here. We appreciate it. Thanks to our attendees. And again, if you have not yet taken the Central Iowa Broadband Internet Study or survey, I should say, take it, shout it from the rooftops, tell your friends and neighbors, and we hope to gather great data so we can continue work on the study and hopefully produce some great results here for Central Iowans. Thank you all for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you.